Testing who? So it's about a test, and we're going to find out as we go along who's really testing who. And let's read verses 17. We're going to read verses 1 through 7. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, and said, Give us water, that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water. And the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is this, that thou hast brought us up out of Egypt to kill us, and our children, and our cattle with thirst? And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, What shall I do unto this people? They be almost ready to stone me. And the Lord said unto Moses, Go on before the people, and take with thee of the elders of Israel, and thy rod wherewith thou smotest the river. Take in thine hand, and go. Behold, I will stand before thee there upon the rock in Horeb, and thou shalt smite the rock, and there shall come water out of it, that the people may drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribath, because of the chidings of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? So when did this happen?
After the Exodus.
This is Exodus 17. What happens in Exodus 20?
Before Mount Sinai.
This is before Mount Sinai, okay? This is before the Ten Commandments were given. And it was before they reached the Promised Land. We know from verse 6 that the location is Horeb, but the location is not as important as the revelation of what happened there. Okay, I'm not very good with geography. I could make a map and show you, but there's more. We're going to find out that there's more than one place that's called Meribah and Massah as we go through this story. So according to verse 1, who was leading them?
Moses.
According to verse 1, who was leading them?
The Lord.
It was the commandment of the Lord. So Moses was not their leader. It was the Lord that was leading them. It was his commandment. They were where they were because God told them to go there. And Moses is just following God's commandment. In verse 6, he said, I will stand before you on the mount, before he gave the water. So the Lord is definitely the one that was leading them. But what was the accusation of the people in verse 3? That it was Moses who brought them out of Egypt. And there's always a risk of visible leaders that the people will transfer. This is the same thing with idolatry. If you make an idol, you tend to think that your idol is the one that's leading you and not God. And that's why God forbid idolatry. And so there's always that danger with leaders, whether it's Trump or whether whoever it is, that we think that person is providing what's being provided and not God himself. What had the Israelites, when they came to this place, what was their problem? They're thirsty. But what had they already forgotten?
Who fed them and who provided.
Yeah, they forgot the plagues. They forgot the slaying of the firstborn in Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, the destruction of Pharaoh's army. This was all out the window now because of their current situation and the crisis that they were going through. And I guess that brings up, are we at risk of forgetting how God has led us in the past just because there's a perceived crisis in our life right now? That's a risk to us. So we need to take that to heart and make sure that we don't act the same way they did. Who was it they really had a problem with according to Moses? It's in verse 2. Who is it that they really had a problem with? The Lord. It was the Lord, because Moses wasn't really the one leading them. So if you really get right down to it, It's God. So we can blame a lot of people for the things that are going on in our life. We can blame each other. But really, when we do that, we're distrusting the Lord, because we're saying, Lord, you're not really the one in control of my life. It's this other person that's the burr in my saddle. It's this other person that's doing this to me. And so we're really testing the Lord, even though it looks different. In our minds it looks different. But really it's distrust and disbelief, a lack of faith in God that he's the one leading us. What was Moses' evaluation of the extent of the crisis? You see it in verse 4. They were going to stone him. These people are so mad, Lord, they're going to kill me. What do I do? So this in his mind too, obviously this was a crisis, but God has also promised, Moses followed God's instructions. We know the story. He did strike the rock, and the supply of the water that they needed, God gave them. And he's also promised what for us?
Food and water.
He's promised that our bread and water would be sure if we are faithful to him. We've talked about Jacob, how God made promises to him, and then Jacob vowed to God. We cannot claim God's promises and not be faithful to him and then expect that he's going to fulfill his end of that bargain. There's a two-way street. So we need to be faithful, and of course God is faithful. It said, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribath because of the chiding of the children of Israel, and because they tempted the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? So what is another name for the word tempted here? Up on the screen here. It's in your Bible too, but it's a test, right? When they say they tempted the Lord. They're testing the Lord. And what was their question? Is the Lord among us or not? They're wondering whether they have God's blessing. They wonder whether they have God's presence. But what do you think about testing the God of the universe? What do you think about that? Okay. It depends on the test, because God has given promises. Can we test God's promises? Yeah. We can test God's promises to make sure, not to make sure, but we can verify the veracity of God's promises by testing them. If God says, give me the 10th, like we talked about in Sabbath school, we can test whether he's going to provide for all of our needs. And that's something that we can do. But it's a little different when it comes to a lack of faith and being rebellious or disobedience. That is a different kind of test. We're testing really whether God is faithful. And that's not a good test to be testing God with. Who is really being tested and who failed? The people were the ones that were really being tested. And that, like I said, remember, this is just before they could have gone into the promised land. But they failed another test. We're not going to get into that today, but this is one of the first tests that led up to that. But we need to remember, is anything too hard for God? No, we have God's word. And in Romans 8, if God be for us, who can be against us? If God's on our side. But the question is, are we on his? Strong's, the Hebrew meaning of the word Meribath. And it's interesting because if you look at 4809, that's the location. So just like we talked about Bethel, Meribath is an actual location. But the root to that word is actually 4808. And it says Meribath means strife, contention, quarrel, provocation, or strife. And then the next one is Massah. Again, 4532 is the location. But if you look at the root to that word, that city or that location, it has a meaning. And Massah means a testing of men, judicial, or of God, querulous, a temptation or a trial. And I didn't know exactly what the word querulous means. Do any of you? Querulous? Querulous means complaining in a petulant or whining manner. Do any of us, can any of us relate to that as parents or grandparents? Yeah. But do you realize that we do the same thing to God when we distrust him? When we're going through a crisis, we do the same thing. It should be evident that these names are more important about what happened than where it happened or the actual location. All right, now let's look at Numbers 20, verses 1 through 13. Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, so it's right between them. Numbers chapter 20, and we're going to read verses 1 through 13. Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, to the mount of desert of Zin in the first month, and the people abode in Kadesh, and Miriam died there and was buried there. And there was no water for the congregation, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people chode with Moses and spake, saying, Would God that we had died with our brethren. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing this right. Would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. And why have you brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt, to bring us unto this evil place? It is no place of seed, or of figs, or of vines, or of pomegranates, neither is there any water to drink. And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water. And thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. And he said unto them, Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beasts also. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, Because ye believed me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. This is the water of Meribath, because the children of Israel strove with the Lord, and he was sanctified in them. All right, so what's the same here and what's different? We're going to talk about that. So we have a same perceived crisis, right? There's no water. I think it's interesting that what did they wish that they had done in verse 3? They wished that they had died. And when they talk about with their brethren in the wilderness, who are they talking about?
The ones that got swallowed up.
Yeah, Korah. Remember the judgment of God on Korah? They're saying, we wish we had died. So really what they're saying is, God, we're not really thankful for everything you've done up until this point. We wish we had died. Very, very unthankful. Are we complaining? Are we in that same boat? We have to be careful because this is written for us, okay? When they're blaming Moses, again, what are they doing? This is the same thing. They're blaming God, but they're also accusing Moses of being the one leading them. When they're blaming him, they're saying, you're the one responsible for what we're going through. So again, he's the one leading. In both instances, we see Moses and Aaron, that they're seeking God's direction. In both instances, God gives explicit directions of what they're to do. In both instances, there's a rod and there's a rock. In both instances, Moses struck the rock. And in both instances, God provided water. So those are the things. Do you see anything else that's similar or the same about these two stories?
Almost identical.
Yeah, almost. It's very close. So what's different? So what's different is the location. Okay, and like I said, I'm not a good at geography, but this isn't the same place as the last Meribath. Okay, this isn't the same place as the last Massa. It's just describing the same exact thing, the same exact temper tantrum, if you want to call it, the same exact thing that Israel did. Okay, the time is 40 years later. This is before they're about to really enter the promised land. The first time they failed, this time they're going to enter the promised land, and it's right before that. What do you see different in Moses' attitude in verse 10? Verse 10.
Yeah.
He calls them rebels. Do you remember back before Moses said he would wish that God would blot his name out of the book of life for his brethren? But here he's lost his patience. He is frustrated with them, and one of the reasons for that is that he's also lost his faith, and we're going to see that as we keep going. But when he says, "Must we fetch?" Oh, another thing that I wanted to say. So he calls his brethren rebels. So he's censuring his brethren. Do you think God looks upon it favorably when we censure one another? He doesn't. He doesn't. You know, we're all brothers and sisters. And when we call someone a name, or you heretic, or you rebel or something, that's not something that's favorable in God's eyes. You know, even Jesus, it tells us in Jude, when he was contending with the body of Moses, he did not accuse Satan. So that's God's thoughts. That's God's character. This is humanity, Moses' humanity showing through in a weak moment. When Moses said, "Must we fetch?" When he talks about "must we fetch you water out of this rock," what's he doing? He's putting himself as God. He's putting himself as he and Aaron are the ones who are going to draw this water out of the rock. He's ascribing a position that's God's alone. He didn't say, "The Lord will bring water out of the rock for you." He said, "Must we fetch water out of the rock for you?" And he was actually, when he said that, you realize what he was doing? All of these years, they kept saying, blaming Moses for everything that went wrong. And he was saying, no, God's in control. God's the one leading. But when he did this, he was actually giving he was giving the responsibility to himself, that they were the ones that were going to fetch. It was putting God to the side, and he was actually confirming what they had been saying all of these years.
Yes.
So interesting, very interesting. Moses and Aaron themselves lost or lacked faith in God in this instance. In verse 12, it says that their actions revealed, "You believed me not." Okay, that wasn't Israel. This was talking about Moses and Aaron. He said, "Ye believed me not." So, past performance does not prove future success. We can do very good things, but we can have a moment of weakness. And in this moment, Moses and Aaron did not believe God as they should. And we know that Moses disobeyed by striking the rock instead of speaking to it. And what was the significance of striking or speaking to the rock? Number one, it's God's command, but who is the rock?
Jesus.
That's why we have this. You might notice that my hymns are around rocks today. Rock of Ages. Jesus is the rock. Jesus was the rock that was stricken. Jesus is the living water that comes out of the rock. He said, "You search the scriptures, because in them you think you have eternal life. These are they that testify of me." Jesus was only to be stricken how many times? Once. He wasn't to be stricken. And so we don't sacrifice Christ over and over again. Christ is sacrificed once. And then, because of the way that God has set up the plan of salvation, What do we need to do when we need something, when we need that living water? We ask, we speak. He doesn't have to be smitten again. We just speak, and we have those blessings that come from Christ. By their actions, Moses and Aaron did not sanctify God in the eyes of Israel. So they really failed in what they did. And rather than God's judgment being directed towards Israel here, who are his judgments directed towards?
Aaron and Moses.
Moses and Aaron. So it's directed towards leadership. Moses and Aaron were excluded from leading Israel into the promised land. So it's some heavy stuff here, but God's put this in his word so that we can learn from it. Any questions or any other comments about this?
Well, the promised land, that was all conditional, right?
All of God's promises are conditional. Yeah, if Abraham would obey God and follow his charges and keep his word and his statutes, yeah, God would do that. And it's the same way with Jacob. God did promise those things, but he knew that Jacob would be faithful, and that's what led him to make the vow. But yeah, all of God's promises are conditional. We can't say God's promises and then I can claim it and go against the condition of the promise. Yeah, because he promised cursings and blessings. Blessings if you keep, cursings if you don't. And he made it very clear in his word. So, all right, any other questions or comments? We're going to move on. This is the water of Meribath, because the children of Israel strove with the Lord, and he was sanctified in them. It's part of the same passage that we read there, but does anything strike you here in this verse? Yes. Who did not sanctify the Lord in the eyes of Israel? Moses and Aaron. They didn't sanctify him. But was God sanctified anyway? He was. He was sanctified because his character was shown. It's interesting, and we talked about this a little bit. God, you would think that maybe if Moses didn't do it exactly right, that the water wouldn't have come out of the rock. That's kind of our human thinking. But the water still came out of the rock. But he completely undid. Number one, he disobeyed, but he completely undid the type of the plan of salvation, that Christ was only to be struck once. But even though Moses and Aaron failed to sanctify God, God was still sanctified where? In his people. So, just think about that. God is very merciful. He's gracious. He is still sanctified in his people, even though we grumble and complain. But God didn't fail. He was tested, and God proved himself faithful. So we don't ever have to question whether God is going to follow through and God's going to do his part. What we have to question is whether we're going to do ours. The people and the leaders fail the test, but God remains faithful. This is in Psalms. It says, they angered him also at the waters of strife, so that it went ill with Moses for their sakes, because they provoked his spirit, so that he spake unadvisedly with his lips. And so we see here a little glimpse. God's giving us a little glimpse into Moses' failure. And when it talks about the waters of strife, what's that referring to? Meribath. That's exactly what it's referring to. God was angry. They angered him. Do we risk God's anger by our murmuring and complaining? We do. It says it went ill with Moses because of the very people he loved and was leading for 40 years. The very people that he gave his whole life for. It turned on him. It went ill with him because of them. And his censure of his brethren and his words, must we fetch you water out of this rock, were from what kind of spirit?
Self.
It's provoked. He was provoked. It says it was a provoked spirit. They provoked his spirit. And we are at the risk of speaking inadvisedly with our lips. In his anger, he struck the rock instead of speaking to it. So, we all can get that flash of anger. And I think we know what that feels like because we can identify with Moses because sometimes we're out of our heads. But still there's consequences. And God holds leadership to a higher account than the children of Israel, as we'll see in this story.
I think it's interesting that, a spirit is being provoked. And I've noticed, especially recently in my life, that the enemy will stir up emotion. You stir up the spirit, and then there's strike, or you speak unadvisedly, or you do something as a result of that, when the frontal lobe, isn't in charge at that moment.
Yeah.
And, I've had occasion that
All right, we're gonna, go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's why it's so important to constantly pray to God, help me to stay toned down so I won't lose control. Help me to keep that focus.
I agree. Okay, continuing in the same chapter, Numbers 20, 23 through 29. And we're going to look and see God's follow-through here. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor, by the coast of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered into his people, for he shall not enter into the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, because ye rebelled against my word at the water of Meribath. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up into Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, and put them upon Eleazar his son. And Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, and shall die there. And Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up into Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, and put them upon Eleazar his son. And Aaron died there in the top of the mount. And Moses and Eleazar came down from the mount. And when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, even all the house of Israel. So we see mourning here for death, and it was for a long time, for a whole month. And I'm not exactly sure what consisted of mourning, but I think it was kind of like a period of fasting where they would give up certain things, festivities, and they really took it to heart that one of their leaders had died. And so I'm sure that happened with Miriam, and as we'll see in the future, it happened with Moses also. It says, Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, for he shall not enter into the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, because ye rebelled against my word at the water of Meribath. And I find it ironic that what was it that Moses, the accusation or the censure that he gave against his brethren when he talked to them? Remember what he called them? He called them rebels. But who's God calling rebels here?
Moses.
Moses and Aaron. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting how our minds can flip. We can see our brethren in a certain light, but yet we can be guilty of the exact same thing, or in this instance, something even worse. And so we have to be very careful. God is merciful, but He does hold us accountable. And it's interesting, I mentioned that too in Sabbath school. Aaron didn't miss the promised land because he made a golden calf or assented to that. He missed the promised land because of this event at Meribath. And, I would have thought, in human judgment, we would, oh man, he can't be the high priest, but that's not the way God works. God takes us in our frailty and He uses us. And I shouldn't be up here talking to you guys either, but God does that. He uses men to talk to men. All right, Numbers. Go ahead, Frank.
I'm just thinking, I don't believe he lost his salvation.
No. These men loved God. These men realized instantly, just like David when Nathan talked to him and said, "You are the man." These men realized instantly what they had really done, that they had brought reproach upon God, and I know they repented. Both Moses and Aaron, they were godly men. I mean, one was the high priest and one was one of the greatest prophets. So, but there were still consequences for their sin, and we cannot esteem, it was still a choice, and we cannot esteem sin lightly in our lives, or we risk the same thing.
Well, I think it's interesting too that part of their sin was that they were, and you may have already said it, taking responsibility.
They were taking on the prerogatives of God by saying, "Must we fetch you water?"
This is our responsibility. No, it's God.
Yeah. All right.
When Moses died on the top of the mountain, we know later on he was resurrected. God had something better Canaan for him. Right.
Yeah, and I don't think this enters into aspects of eternal life, but there are people in the Bible, and even us, that were saved or will be saved, but their life was so raunchy that they took other people down with them. And so, when God says, "You did not sanctify me in the eyes of the people," their actions affected other people. Even though they may have recovered and repented, there may have been other people that didn't recover. And that's the same risk with us. We think it's a little thing for us to do something in front of our kids, but it could have lasting eternal consequences that we don't understand. And we may recover from it, or even our brethren, but our brother may not recover from that. So everything is weighed in that balance, and we have to be very careful and mindful of it. Numbers 27, verses 12 through 14. And the Lord said unto Moses, "Get thee up into this mount Abarim, and see the land which I have given unto the children of Israel. And when thou hast seen it, thou also shalt be gathered into thy people, as Aaron thy brother was gathered. For ye rebelled against my commandment in the desert of Zin, in the strife of the congregation, to sanctify me at the water before their eyes, that is the water of Meribath in Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin." And that again is just repeating that verse. I don't know if I have much to say about that, but it's just reiterating. This is said kind of over and over again. If you haven't gotten the picture, God brings this back up, Meribath and Massa. Now let's read Deuteronomy 32, one chapter forward. Deuteronomy 32, we're going to read verses 48 to 52. And the Lord spake unto Moses that selfsame day, saying, "Get thee up into this mountain, Abarim, unto Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, that is over against Jericho, and behold the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel for a possession. And die in the mount whither thou goest up, and be gathered unto thy people, as Aaron thy brother died in Mount Hor, and was gathered unto his people. Because ye trespassed against me among the children of Israel at the waters of Meribah, Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin, because ye sanctified me not in the midst of the children of Israel. Yet thou shalt see the land before thee, but thou shalt not go thither unto the land which I give to the children of Israel." Just another account. And again, it's because you trespassed against me. They did not sanctify God before the congregation. First time, it was okay. The children complained. They obeyed God. The second time did not go so well. And that was, again, when did this happen? The second time? Right before the promised land. And this, actually, what we just read was after Moses blessed all of the tribes and gave them their blessings and said everything that he had said, that God told him to go up into the mountain. I think this next one mentions that. He says, and of Levi he said, let thy Thummim and thy Urim, obviously talking about the priesthood, be with thy Holy One, whom thou didst prove at Massah, and with whom thou didst strive at the waters of Meribath. So we know that was actually Christ that was the Holy One that they were striving with, because Christ was that rock, and Christ is the living water. But like I said, this was the blessing right before what we just read. In Deuteronomy 34, I think we have time to read it if we do it quickly. We can just make it through, well, we'll just read through verse 8. Deuteronomy 34, 1 through 8. And Moses went up from the plain of Moab into the mount of Nebo to the top of Pisgah, that is over against Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead and to Dan, and all Naphtali, and the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all the land of Judah, unto the utmost sea, and the south, and the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of the palm trees, unto Zor. And the Lord said unto him, this is the land which I swear unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed, and I have caused thee to see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not go over thither. So Moses the servant of the Lord died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, over against Beth Peor, but no man knoweth of his sepulchre unto this day. And Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And then after that, Joshua takes over. But again, you see, the Bible says precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. And you see that God had the children mourn for his leaders for 30 days. And so that was interesting. But any other observations about what we just read?
And also that later on the mount was Moses and Elijah. So he set foot on the top of that mountain, and finally set his foot on the Holy Land.
Okay. Yep. That was after his resurrection. You're talking about on the Mount of Transfiguration. He met with Jesus. That is true. All right, Psalms 81 verse 7 says, Thou callest in trouble, and I delivered thee. I answered thee in the secret place of thunder. I proved thee at the waters of Meribah. Psalm 81 7. So Israel tempted, and they tested God, but they were the ones that failed the test. Because God said, I proved thee at the waters of Meribah. But, hopefully God doesn't have to go through that process with us, or he has to test us because we lack faith and we just don't trust in him. But these things are written. It says, now all these things happened unto them for examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. And I think it's in 1 Corinthians 10. If you're not there, you can turn there. 1 Corinthians 10. Yeah, 1 Corinthians 10 verse 4. And it says, and did all, this is speaking of Israel. In fact, you know what, we have time. Let's just read it. It says, moreover, brethren, verse 1, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat. So what's more important? The physical manna and the water that God gave them, or the spiritual meat? It's the spiritual meat. And did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. So here you have Paul telling us who the rock was that was smitten, where the water, who the water is that they received. It was spiritual, the spiritual nourishment. Jesus said, I am the bread which came down from heaven. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. They're dead. It's the spiritual bread, it's the spiritual water that we need that's so important. And that's what Esau despised. He despised the spiritual and took instead what he could touch and taste and feel in this life. Go ahead, Frank.
And also you can go back from 1 Corinthians 10:4, you go to Matthew 16, who's the rock? It's Christ. It's not Peter, as some churches say.
Yep. Upon this rock will I build my church.
It's the rock
Yep.
of Christ.
And that rock was that he's the Christ, the Son of the living God. All right, let me see here. Where were we? Verse 4. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our example, to the intent we should not lust after evil things, as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ. So it tells you right there who they were testing. It was Christ, because he was their leader in the wilderness. God was working through his Son. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were restored as serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all of these things happened to them for ensamples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. So what happened at Meribath? It has lessons for us today. Lessons for us. We can either be the leadership that's not sanctifying God, or we can be the murmuring congregation. But in either case, we're testing God. When we're in a crisis, will we tempt God or exercise true faith to him? Will we look to faulty men, or will we look to God? Will we forget the way he's led us in the past? Will we question whether he's even among us or not? Will we obey him and sanctify him, or bring reproach upon his holy name? You know, this is stuff that we have to think about, because we too are on the borders of the promised land. May we consider these things as we approach our heavenly